Hi, everyone. I automatically muted everybody as soon as I came in. Okay, almost time.
Are they all done now? No,
Oh, some people are unmuted. This is cool. There's a lot of people. Okay, so it's 1 o'clock. So I really want to check in with everybody, but it's hard with so many people in a class. But I do want to talk a little bit about kind of the features that we can use on Zoom. I'm going to open up the Manage Participants, and then there's something when you click on participants, you can see something I think from your side that says raise hand. Can you raise your virtual hand if you've done a Zoom class already? Cool. So a few of you. And then now if you could unraise your hand. So I think you have to unraise it. Great. And then just to practice this, in case you can't see it, if you go to click on participants at the bottom of the screen, and then you have a list of participants that show up on the right, can you raise your hand if this is your first class Zoom meeting? Cool. Okay. All right, so, and as you could see, I think on the top, so you can unraise your hand if you would like now, and then I can also do that for you if you forget. But you'll see at the top of your screen, it says that it's recording. So I know I didn't give you much notice for that, but I will be posting this. I think you could just see what's on my screen. I haven't actually checked it out of how it really works. Another feature that I think that we'll use is the chat feature. So if you click on the chat, you can type something for everybody to see. So this might be the best way to ask questions. If you have questions, I'll just keep this chat kind of open to the side. Yes, so great. So first, because right now you can see me talking, right? Yeah, I don't know how to like ask you guys. I guess you guys, there's like a thumbs up button. You can like just do a reaction and be like, oh, thumbs up. Great, thank you. So you could see me. I just wanted to talk with you guys first before I put the slides up, but I will do that in just a moment. Oh, I don't, okay. Look at this. Oh, you can ask questions privately versus publicly. I had no idea. So you could either send something to everyone or send something just to me. If it's a question about the material that we'll be talking about today, just make it to everybody. If it's just to me, you could just, that's fine too. I didn't know you could do that, or email me later or text me. Catherine, your TA, is also in class today too, but even for her, I told her class isn't mandatory, but at least she has my number if something goes wrong and nobody can hear me and I'm not paying attention to chats and things like that. Great. So if there's any, I'm learning a little bit. I'm looking at the private chat, but that I could put files and send something to all of the class too. So I hope everybody's doing okay and staying safe. This is, I didn't expect to try to teach classes online, but I'm gonna do my best to transition this and make it easy for everybody. Class is no longer required. If you ever wanna come to class for, just a certain amount of time and then you're busy later and you need to leave early, like that, you can still do that. That's fine. Or come in late. Just come in when you want. Luckily, I have it set up so you'll be automatically muted when you join. So hopefully we won't have any of those, like, I don't know, I've been seeing a ton of like funny videos on Facebook and stuff of Zoom meetings gone wrong. So hopefully we don't end up on one of those. But I really wanted to do some sort of live session so you guys can respond in the chats or ask questions if you need to. But I also understand that people are in different time zones, people are taking care of family, or in the hospital, or what, there's a lot of things going on. So I'll be able to post this after it's over, and you'll still have access to it. I am going to try to do an activity today. I haven't uploaded it to Canvas yet, but I'm going to give you the instructions during today's lecture. And once I post it to Canvas, then you'll kind of just put your responses into Canvas. I'll put the instructions up there too. So people who miss the lecture, I'll try to put the instructions for like what you need for the activity in Canvas, and that way you can do it before the start of the next class. Or no, before the start of the next exam. Isn't that what it is? Like the night of the review session, I think, is when everything's due. I'll have to look at that again. But it's in the announcement. Okay, does anybody want to chat questions about logistics, about how or unmute themselves or raise their hand, however we want to do this, about logistics for this course? Okay, so if they come up, still definitely let me know. Oh, got one. Okay, so how will testing work? So Catherine and I haven't created the exams yet, but what we're going to do is have the test be on Canvas. And so there'll be some multiple choice questions, but probably not as many as before. And then there'll be 1 or 2 short answer questions. And you'll have 2 hours to complete the exam, but I'm going to give you, I think, how it's going to work, like a 24-hour window where you can start it. So hopefully giving you guys a larger window of when to start it will help those who are maybe in different time zones and things like that, but you'll still have the 2-hour time period to do it. But I'm hoping to get more information about exactly how we're going to do the exams. I'm kind of toying with the ideas of making it so not every student sees the same question, because I do want you to work independently on these, but it will be open note and open book. Oh, that's something I should say. With if you purchased a hard copy of the textbook and you don't have it for some reason, there's 2 things I'm going to do about that. Well, one thing I'm going to do, one thing that you can do. You can contact the Norton representative, who's the publisher, and email them if you want. I can send you the link of where to ask for information. And I think they should be able to help you with an electronic version, potentially. The other thing I want to do is, so because you'll be responsible for just like certain sections in the textbook on the exam, I'll go ahead and post like screenshots. I think I can do that, because I actually don't have my hard copies of the books either. I just have them in an electronic version. I'll try to post screenshots of just the sections that I'm testing you on that are just from the textbook. So even though that'll help you with reading that new information, having access to the textbook is still really helpful, because it kind of goes more in depth about the topics that I'm talking about than just what I'm doing in lecture. Okay. Okay, so are there any other logistics questions? Okay, I'm actually going to try to record this on QuickTime too, just the audio in case the file's smaller. So let me just open that up real quick. Okay. And let's see what happens when I screen share. Okay. I don't think we need this picture. Okay, so what's great is I have the slides up. It is, oh, this is weird. This is going to distract me for a little bit. That it's typing out what I'm saying. So there's subtitles. I can still see some of you on the side here. I don't have, let's see. I don't have the little thing that shows me all of the people in the chat or in the group. So if you raise your hand or anything like that, I actually won't see it. But what I can see is the chat. So that's probably the best thing to use is the chat. Can people see the subtitles and the screen of the slides? Can you see something that says emotion? Great, great. Thank you. Okay. All right, so I got a question earlier about receiving partial points on free response questions. Yes, so you are going to be able, so for short answer, it's not going to be all or nothing. We are going to read through those and I haven't figured out the exact grading system yet, but different parts of the short response will be worth different points. And, you know, if you give the right answer of a term, but without the correct explanation, you'll probably still get a point for having the correct term. So something pretty similar if you've had exams with short answers before. That's a great question. For the revised syllabus, I decided not to do a revised syllabus in terms of like how we're doing Zoom and everything like that, because the information with Zoom is going to be in the initial announcement that I sent out. What I did do that was new with the syllabus was updated the weekly schedule of events so that you know what we'll be talking about that day. I will still be posting pre-class and post-class slides. So for example, we'll be doing a demonstration today and I'll make sure to post that after class. Let's see about what was I going to say about the revised syllabus? Yeah, so it's still a work in progress. So please don't feel like you're bothering me or anything like that if you want to email me and you have questions and you're like, what about this part? What about this part? Like, I think that'll help kind of put the class together a little bit better. Okay, so someone had a question about Poll Everywhere. What a great idea. I completely forgot about Poll Everywhere with all of this. You know, I could probably try to do something like that through my phone or a different screen. So I won't be doing it this time, but I'll try to do something like that for future classes where if I don't, so you can join this meeting on a phone if you want, but you could also join on a computer. So if you have your phone available, or if you have a split screen, I'm not exactly sure, then maybe we could try to figure out how to do a Poll Everywhere type of thing. Let's see. Okay. All right. So please, yeah, keep sending me questions when you have them. Um, and yeah, hopefully that'll be good. Oh, I need to get back. Okay. All right. So let's get started with talking about emotions. I'll still try to take a break around like 1:45 or so. For this chapter, I believe the textbook also has an entire like half section on motivation too. There's not going to be anything on the exam about motivation as its own section. We're really going to be focusing on the emotion aspects of it. So with the first thing I want to do is talk about what an emotion is. Okay. So it seems like something we all know what it is. If we think about it, we're like, all right, we can think of emotions, we can think about what this means, but it actually really turns out that thinking of a definition for emotion is really tough. Oh, my internet's slow, that's annoying. Sorry, it just, but you guys can still hear me, right? Yes. Okay, so I'll keep going, but please, if somebody in the chat, if something's going wrong, just let me know, or Catherine can email me too. Obviously, for this slide, talking to a neighbor isn't going to work as well, but I want you to think about who did that? Who drew on the screen? That's cool. Okay. I want you to think about what your definition of emotion would be, and try not to use like, you can't, don't define it as like it is a feeling like that. So that's not telling me what an emotion is. So just think about that for a moment. Okay, does anybody want to share something that they thought of that is either part of the definition or um, something that just when somebody asks you what is an emotion, what is the first thing that you thought about? So one student is, it's more than just what we feel about something, it's there's a mechanism, it's like how we get to feeling something and how we express that feeling. So almost about what are we like showing to other people. Anything else? Nobody wants to type. This is hard. I can't like point anybody out. All right, a mental reaction to a stimulus. I love that because one, it's going on inside your mind. And the second part is that you're reacting to something. There's something in the environment or something in your thoughts that lead you to have a certain reaction. So that could be something that is part of the definition of emotion. Okay, so if we look at the next slide, this is what I have in my slides. I'll try to change it up a little bit in yours, but yours is if you like skip down to the slide that says emotions versus moods, you'll see that oh, sorry, I can't point to the screen here. You'll see that this immediate, relatively brief response to environment or thoughts. This is really a pretty simple and kind of good definition of emotion. And these are the things that it involves, okay? So this whole slide, you can think of this as the definition of emotion and how we're talking about it in this class, okay? So by immediate, what we mean is that it's happening as a response that's like right away. It doesn't just like there isn't some stimulus or something in the environment and you look at it and then there's this big delay and then you feel an emotion about it. It's an immediate reaction to that. And emotions are pretty brief. Like, so you might think about like, oh, I felt sad for a long time. That's not actually how researchers define emotion. They defined emotions as something that like you have a reaction and then it goes away. It's actually pretty brief. And it's a response to something. It can't, when you have an emotion, you know what it's connected to. So it doesn't have to be in the outside environment. It could also be in your inner environment, like thoughts. So it does have to be a response. Okay. And you might have thought, okay, this is what I think of as emotions, or these like feelings, these conscious feelings that I'm aware of. That's only part of it, is being aware of this feeling that you have. There's also these physiological responses and changes in behavior. So you don't have these slides, but this is just to kind of like help you visualize it. I will say, just to talk about this lecture a little bit, my lecture has very less words in it, but your notes have words in it more. So these are just to kind of give you some examples of what I'm talking about and make it so you're not like looking at me and reading the slides and reading the subtitles at the same time. There's just less going on for you, at least for this lecture. Okay, so basically all I'm saying here is like, here's a stimulus, okay? You get a package in the mail and it's immediate, you feel happy, okay? And there's a physiological response that goes with that. So like your heart rate can change, okay? So let's see. So something like, you know, you're happy about getting this kind of thing. You might, you know, once you get the package in the mail, it could lead to a certain kind of behavior. Let's say you're so happy, so this is a positive emotional response, that could actually trigger some sort of change in behavior, like you do a little dance or something, right? That can be something that changes. But if you're disappointed, let's say your football team lost or something, then it could potentially change some behaviors too. Like maybe you don't feel like cheering for that team as much. So these behavioral changes can happen. Okay, so going back to this slide, so I gave, you know, examples of positive and negative emotions. So they have this valence to them, and a lot of times they change your behavior and kind of your thought processes too. So emotions and those feelings are going to be different than what your thoughts and behaviors are, but they kind of all influence each other. Okay. So I started out by defining emotion as what you see on this slide. So you have this one, right? That it's something that's immediate, brief, and a response to a specific event. But you might be thinking, wait, I've felt this way for a long time. Like, oh, I felt sad. I've been feeling sad for a while. But if you ask somebody, why are you feeling sad? Maybe there's something that they can refer to that led to that initial event, but sometimes it might be like, I don't know why I'm still sad. I don't know why this is happening. And so what I'm pointing to here is what's different between an emotion and a mood. And so if you don't know why you're feeling a certain way, a lot of times that's connected to this mood. And this is something that's much slower and much longer lasting. And it's more of, it's not specific, okay? It's more like an emotion is. It's this general state of being. So that's not what we're talking about today. We're not talking about moods. We're talking about emotions. Okay. All right. The other thing is, I said that you might think of emotions as feelings. And I just want to point out again, just on the slides, that emotions and feelings are not the same thing. The feeling part is only one part of the emotional response. Um, so really including all of this. Could you guys just maybe even if one or two people can say yes. When I have my cursor on the slide, can you see it? Okay, I saw someone. All right, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, great. So that's only one part of it. Here are all the aspects that go into making an emotion. And so all definitions of emotion and all theories of emotion that we're going to talk about the subjective feeling going into it, physiological reactions, and behavioral responses. And then most modern psychologists who study emotion would also involve cognitive processes in it. So there's some sort of thinking about what the emotion is that goes into it. Okay. All right. So let's try to think of an example here, and you can try to type it out if you would like. Let's talk about anger as an emotion. Okay. So what might like a physiological reaction be? Meaning like what changes in your body with anger? Yeah, blood pressure. Yeah, raised heart rate, face turning red, yeah, getting your muscles tense, wrinkled eyebrows. That's great. So something that's interesting about the wrinkled eyebrows kind of sounds like a little bit of a behavioral response, right? So the tense muscles, it's almost like you're not really controlling your blood pressure, your heart rate, and your face turning red. These are these like things happening within your body. But with facial expressions, that's a behavior that's changing because of this anger that happened. So wrinkled eyebrows and just how that expression looks, that is part of what expressing anger would look like in that emotion. What other like behaviors would go with emotion or with anger? Like what, if you feel anger, what kind of behavior might that lead to? Yeah, raising your voice, totally. Aggression, starting a fight. Yeah, I know, like feeling right, like you want to scream, you want to hit something, you're feeling really like the the emotion of anger is leading you to do these different things. And remember, it is actually important to remember that it's not just these actions of like fighting and being aggressive. It also does include those facial expressions, like someone brought up earlier. Yeah, hostility. That's a great one. Okay. So I feel like the subjective feeling is a little bit harder to answer, but maybe not. It's just is like, how would you describe the feeling of anger? It just seems so like meta. You would just be like, oh, angry. But how do you describe it? Does anybody have any ideas? I know this one's tough because you kind of are like, well, anger, it just feels like anger. I mean, maybe you could explain it as like, you feel like you're ready to explode, right? Or maybe you feel aggressive. Like, yeah, um, you feel like you're getting warmer, or I don't know, like, um, yeah, fire inside you. Right. So you're feeling maybe discomfort. So it's like So I'm getting a few responses, which is great. But I still think this is kind of hard to answer. But does anybody have any ideas why this is called the subjective feeling and not an objective feeling? Like, what does subjective mean? Yeah. So the reason that it's called subjective is because even though we can all kind of recognize what anger is, how we feel it and our feeling of it is going to vary from person to person, kind of like what people in the chat are saying. Okay, so that's where the subjective feeling part comes in. Right, and so somebody in the chat is asking about if you're feeling betrayal or something that led to the anger in the first place, that maybe that betrayal is part of your subjective feeling of anger, that's part of that feeling. I think it totally could be if it's varying from person to person. Okay, and I think that's actually a good segue into talking about the cognitive processes, because what the cognitive process is doing as part of the emotion definition or response is saying, why am I feeling this emotion? Let me try to figure this out. And it could be this person betrayed you. That is why you're feeling angry. And so it really is about thinking what caused this emotion, or why do I feel this way is where that's coming in. Okay. So what am I trying to say here? So I think what I wanted to say here is just even though the definition of emotion is pretty messy and researchers don't agree completely on what it is, you might wonder, then why even study emotions? Why is this something that's interesting in psychology if you can't really like pinpoint exactly what it is? But we do know that emotions are important. We do know they play a huge role in decision making and behavior and things like that. And so it is important to kind of still study emotions and what they are and what causes them and what behaviors might come from feeling certain emotions. Okay. All right. Do I want to talk about? No, that's okay. Okay. So I want to get into the first theory of emotion. And I'm going to talk about 3 different theories today. And they're set up all, actually, I'm going to kind of be talking about 4 theories. And they're all set up slightly differently. And sometimes students on exams get these kind of mixed up. So just make sure that you understand like the order that events take place in leading to an emotion. And if I give you an example of a person feeling a certain way, or experiencing a certain emotion, that you can kind of recognize, oh, what theory does that really follow? Okay, so I'm going to start with, actually, I think what you guys have is like start talking about the common sense theory first, but we'll get back to that. So I'm going to start with just actually, let's talk about just a story first before we even get into the James Lange theory of emotion, and just kind of think about a series of events that happens and emotions that take place and how we can kind of figure out what's going on. So this is just a story. This actually happened to a friend of mine who also has taught Psych 1 before, where she was riding a bike around, oh no, that's not the story. I was just about to make up a story. She was driving and she almost hit a bicyclist. And what she was saying was that it was dark outside. She couldn't really see that well. And the person who was riding a bike didn't have like lights on their bike. I think she's trying to say like, it's not my fault really, but I mean, and what she was doing is she was trying to turn at a stoplight and the cyclist was going straight and she wasn't expecting to see a cyclist, and then she nearly hit him, and it would have been a really bad collision, obviously a car hitting a bicycle. And then she stopped her car in time, and she actually was like so shooken up by this that she pulled her car over and couldn't continue driving. She was just like, I need to pause and take a break here. So she really needed a minute to like catch her breath, and because all of these physiological responses were happening, right? So she was trying to slow her heart rate, and then she was even like, her muscles were so tense. She was holding onto the handle wheel and the driving wheel. What am I saying? Steering wheel. I was like, what is this called? The steering wheel, because like that's how bad that she was tensed up. So she was feeling really scared. So another emotion that you're familiar with. And if we talk about common sense, let's go to the theories. The first one that's on your slides is the common sense theory of emotion. The common sense theory probably tells you that she felt scared because of what happened. Okay, so this is the order of events. She felt scared because of what happened, and then that feeling of fear caused these different physiological responses. So those things like the racing heart, tensing her muscles over the steering wheel, gasping loudly, like that was her reaction, like she just got that scared, sweating palms, rapid breathing. But actually the common sense theory, even though the reason it's called that is because it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, like something happened, it caused you to feel an emotion, and that emotion caused you to feel or caused some physiological responses. It's actually seen that that might not be the best description of what's actually happening with us and our emotions. Okay. All right. Okay, so that's what I was talking about before. And then this is where we're getting to. Okay, so you just heard this story about, all right, there's like a little fly, don't worry about it. We were just talking about this one, the common sense theory. And then there's 3 other theories that we can talk about. Okay. If we look at, well, let's go. We already kind of did the example of this. So let's do this again, except with the bicycle example. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So I think that's why this is here. Let's think about the bicycle example again. When she saw the cyclist and almost hit the cyclist, her emotion of fear or being scared happened right away. It was immediate, and it was this surge, this reaction that happened quickly, and then she needed to kind of process, and it kind of was slowing down. And obviously it's a response to the environment at this point, because it was a cyclist on the road and her car being so close to it. She could tell that she was scared, so her conscious feelings. And then I listed a bunch of the physiological responses that she had, and what that led for her to do in her change of behavior. Okay. So the subjective feeling, what do we think about this for just feeling scared, either in general or kind of related to this close call accident? So we got the subjective part, but what are some feelings that can happen being connected to being scared? I think this is a tough one too. I mean, really, you could say the subjective feeling is like you're feeling scared, right? You're feeling, I think that's fine. So let's skip it. You're feeling scared. So what are some of the physiological reactions that I talked about? Those changes in the body. Yeah, adrenaline rush, definitely. Increased heart rate, tense muscles. So great, we're seeing some examples here. Yeah, maybe, yeah, heavy breathing. Maybe it's hard to think. Um, that might go into more of, um, I don't know, like a behavioral response potentially. But with the physiological reactions, it's kind of interesting if you think about anger versus fear. You probably think you think of those as different emotions, but you've given me a lot of the same physiological reactions. So that kind of tells us, so maybe some emotions have similar physiological reactions. And then what are some behavioral responses that we talked about? At least to almost hitting a bike with your car. Either how she responded or how you might respond once you feel that fear. Yeah, overthinking, totally. Yeah, she stopped the car. That was a very clear response. And slowing her breathing, trying to slow, like just calm herself down. Great. Hmm. Yeah, just can't, not being able to think straight for a moment. All right. So that brings us to these different theories. And I'll just show you before we take our break um, that here's what I've been talking about with the common sense model. So if you have this event of almost hitting a bike, it leads you to feel scared. That's where it goes to. And then you have these symptoms of fear. Okay. So it's really the subjective feeling that happens before the physiological symptoms. And we talked about, is that the best way to think about it? Maybe not. Okay. So the James Lange theory says it's actually the triggering event that happens first. Well, both theories. The triggering event happens first, almost hitting the cyclist. Does it have it? Then the physiological response. So then once something happens that could be something that would lead to fear eventually, before you even know you're feeling scared, you get those symptoms of your heart rate going up and gasping and getting really tense. And then once you have those physiological responses, you can think, oh, okay, this is the emotion that I'm feeling because of these things. So it almost seems like it's like kind of opposite of what you think, what your common sense would be. So we feel sorry because we cry. Okay. So, or we feel sad even because we cry. You can think of it that way too. How weird does that sound? Our common sense would say, like, we're crying because we're sad. But James Lange theory would say, no, we actually figure out based on what our body is doing, if I start crying, I then figure out, oh, it's because I feel sad afterward. Just using another example that's on the slide, we're angry because we strike, and we're afraid because we tremble. So the second one is like this behavior. Certain behavior is getting you to realize, oh, I must be angry. That's the feeling that happens. And if you're trembling, that physiological response is because of being afraid. Okay, so it is kind of hard to remember these different theories because if you don't know this theory very well, it's hard to picture that this is actually what's happening. Okay, so again, in the context of the story that I told, it's the heart rate and muscle, and for fear, right? The heart rate, breathing, and muscle tension happening first, which then you're like, oh, okay, I'm feeling afraid right now. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is a demonstration, but before we get into that, we're gonna do a 5-minute break. So I'm going to, what do I do? I'm gonna stop my video and stop my audio for 5 minutes, and then I will be back, but I'll keep this open, okay? But if you think of any questions during the break, you can still type them in there and we can start with those questions when I get back. All right.
I can't hear shit, bro.
All right. Hi, everyone. So hopefully that was a good break. It went by fast. I think it goes by faster when you can just walk around. Okay. So let's look at the questions. So one I got privately was just about the 5th edition of the book working just as well as the 6th edition. It should for the most part. So it will talk about the same things. Again, you don't have to worry about the emotion or the motivation part of this chapter. What will help though is if you're unsure, I'll be posting the PDFs of the things that I need that'll just be from the textbook from the 6th edition. So you can check that out on Canvas to make sure you're kind of getting the same information, but it should be basically the same information in the 5th edition too. Okay, switching back to the common sense slide. So this is the common sense slide. And so remember, you also have access to these slides on Canvas. So I still suggest like printing them out probably, so that way you can kind of use the screen as just looking at the screen share and write things down when you're looking at it. But you can tell by looking at the common sense model versus the James Lang theory model that these things are switched. So it's for common sense, you're like, you felt scared, so then these physiological responses happened. But for James Lang theory, it's like immediately these physiological responses, and then right after all of those things happen, you have this feeling of fear because of these physiological responses. All right, so we're gonna see how this demo works, and hopefully it works out okay. This is how I usually do it in person. You don't need to take out a pen and a piece of paper if you don't want to, but at least have something where you can kind of type down responses, or it'll just be one number, one response. So it won't be anything that you need a lot of, but it will be helpful to remember this for later, because I'm going to put these instructions on Canvas, and that way we can get an idea of people participating and doing this demonstration on Canvas. All right. Oh no. I guess I just noticed that the slides don't go up with one bullet point at a time. Okay, but what the next slide says is, I think it says, if your last name is A through L, if you want to close your eyes or not look at the screen, it'll be a few minutes, because I'm going to be trying to figure out how to also show you the video. So if your last name starts with an A through L, if you could close your eyes or not look at the screen. Okay, so they should be closed. If your last name's M through Z, I want you to look at the screen and look at these instructions. So you'll do something like this. Okay, so just take a moment to read that. And this is what you'll be writing down, just this last bullet point here. So that's the only thing that you need to remember to write down is a number. Okay, so I'm gonna pull up the video, and unfortunately the people with their eyes closed, I want you to keep them closed during this video, but you'll be able to hear it, but that's okay. All right. So remember what you're doing if you're M through Z.
I wore the wrong socks.
Take 4.
I wore the wrong socks. I did get to ride a bear once. Have you played? Which one was it? Oh, yeah. Have you tried the hot dogs here?
It's like,
Do you get to go home for the rest of the day?
he's not going to be much use to us, I don't think.
Needless to say, I didn't get my deposit. Needless to say, I didn't get my deposit. And Viper Mitsubishi is a proud sponsor of Golden Coat for Hackers.
Okay, so everybody can open their eyes now. So we just watched a video. Now, if people with the last names that start with M through Z can close their eyes or look away from the screen. And I'm going to show a set of instructions to the next group. So if your last name starts with A through L, please read these instructions, otherwise look away from the screen. So if you have something nearby, this is what you'll be doing. And this part at the very end is the only number that you'll need to remember, okay? So take some time to read that. Okay. All right, so keep your eyes closed if you're in the other group. Otherwise, A through L will play this video.
I wore the wrong socks.
Take 4.
I wore the wrong socks. I did get to ride a bear once. You wait, which one was? Oh yeah. Ride the hot dogs here.
It's like,
You get to go home for the rest of the day.
he's not going to be much use to us, I don't think.
Needless to say, I didn't get my deposit. Needless to say, I didn't get my deposit. And Viper Mitsubishi is a proud sponsor of Golden Coat for Hackers.
Are you okay?
Okay. So everybody can open their eyes. All right, so I don't know how many of you were able to find a pen or a pencil to kind of follow the instructions completely, but you might have guessed you had different instructions. So one group had instructions to kind of put this pencil or pen in their mouth like this, which was kind of, you know, with the mouth open, and another group had instructions to put the pencil in their mouth the other way, so their mouth was closed. Does anybody have any ideas as to what the difference, why that might make a difference in rating the funniness of a scale, of a video? What is this? Does this look like anything to you, this expression? Yeah, yeah. So one, you're smiling, okay? And so you're smiling before you even know what you're watching. And here, you're kind of not exactly frowning, but it kind of looks like more of like a sad expression that you might have, but definitely not smiling before you watch a video. And the question is, do people in one group, when the pencil is making them smile, do they think that the video is funnier than people who weren't smiling at first? And that would tell you, hey, the smile happens like when you're smiling, then you're like, oh, I must be smiling because it's funny, not it's funny so then I was smiling, right? So that this is like the James Lang theory. So I wish I could figure out, usually in class I would take a poll, and so maybe this is where Poll Everywhere would help, but I don't have that today. I don't know how to look at everybody. Let's try something. People who were M through Z, how many people gave the video, if you could just type yes, a 3 or higher? Okay, so about 9 people. All right. Now, people who saw this instruction, so A through L, how many people put 3 or higher for how funny the video was? Okay, so I got 4, even though I should have had some message in between to make it so I knew what groups you guys were in. So, I mean, out of the people participating, there were, twice as many people who thought the video was funny when they were smiling than if they weren't. So it seems like, at least in this little class experiment of the people who participated, it's kind of working. All right, you think it's funnier when you're already smiling. So one idea that's part of James Lang's theory is the facial feedback hypothesis. Is when you have a certain facial expression, then that leads you to feel the certain emotional experience. So the kind of like fake it till you make it, if you're smiling, that'll lead you to actually feel happier. That's where this idea is coming from. If you've heard that before, that's coming from this James Lang theory. Okay. This theory does have its problems, though, where, let's see. So most psychologists don't accept this as the most likely explanation of emotion. There are some flaws to this theory that we'll go into. Okay, so for example, remember when we talked about what the physiological responses of fear was and the physiological responses of anger? A lot of those responses were exactly the same. And if James Lang theory says you can figure out what emotion you are feeling, experiencing based on your bodily responses, then there should be distinct bodily responses for every emotion. And researchers don't really agree with that, because there are multiple emotions that have the same bodily responses. So how do you kind of make sense of that? Okay, so that's one problem with James Lang's theory. The other thing is, I actually want to even say this, you could do this across positive and negative emotions too. So even though we've talked about fear and anger having similar physiological responses, you can also talk about excitement having a similar response. So your heart rate goes up and you might get tense, like if you're at a basketball game or something, then you're excited and you're having the same bodily responses. So if that's the case, this seems like we probably need a little bit more to a theory about emotion that can kind of explain this. And so we'll get into some different theories soon. Okay, here's another problem. Your heart rate could go up, your muscles can get tense. These are all bodily responses, and there's no emotion that happens afterward. So if you're working out, if the idea is once you feel these bodily responses, you feel a certain emotion, that doesn't happen all the time. So how can James Lange theory explain something like this exercise? Okay. Okay. Here is probably the most convincing argument against the James Lange theory, and the idea that you feel an emotion after these bodily responses, it might not actually be feasible because of the way that the nervous system is working. So the nervous system is actually too slow for the body response to happen before the emotion. Like the emotion happens so quickly that it seems like how would the emotion happen after a change in a physiological response? Let's see what I have next. So let's see. Oh, this is what this is saying. This is like part of the example of the problem of the nervous system being too slow. So if you're walking down a dark street all alone and you hear a sudden sound behind you, your immediate sense of fear happens well before any of the physical symptoms of fear are detectable. Okay, so in fact, those physical symptoms often take about 3 seconds to occur, but your subjective experience of fear only takes about 1 second to occur. You don't need to remember that specific timing, but I just think it's helpful to remember that it's actually been experimentally demonstrated that your physiological responses are happening slightly after your subjective feeling of fear, which is pretty fascinating. Okay, so we still have, I wish I could ask you any questions about James Lange theory or common sense theory? Okay. All right, well, if they come up, let me know. So we still have 2 more theories to talk about. So the Cannon-Bard theory and the, how do you even say this? I always just call it the 2-factor theory. Schachter Singer. Anyway, you can remember this as the 2-factor theory too, as well. So the Cannon-Bard theory and the 2-factor theory. Here's the model for the Cannon-Bard theory. So first take a look at it and notice what is different about the other 2 theories that we've already discussed. Okay. It isn't that physiological responses happen before the feeling of emotion, or that the feeling of emotion happens before the physiological response. They're happening at the same time, but separately. So that's what Cannon-Bard was trying to say, is that there's an event and it leads to physiological responses and feelings of emotions, and they happen at the same time, okay? And they're independent from one another. So when I say they're independent from one another, what that means is it's not that one causes the other, okay? So saying like, I felt afraid because my brain's emotion processing center was stimulated at the same time that I got a racing heart and rapid breathing because of other systems that are in your body. And that there's separate signals that caused the subjective experience of fear and the physiological arousal. Okay. So here's what I was kind of just talking about. So the different systems, we can think about the autonomic nervous system. I'm not actually going to ask you about like, what about the emotion processing center or the autonomic nervous system? I'm mainly going to talk about it as like physiological responses and feelings of emotions. But you could think about it if it gets kind of through this pathway, the physiological responses, like what we've been talking about here, and then the processing of the emotion is your subjective feeling of fear, and those being separate from one another. Okay. So this is the next theory. This came up about 40 years after the Cannon-Bard theory. Okay. And this is where a lot of students kind of get confused because the two-factor theory kind of like combines the Cannon-Bard Bard and James Lange's theories. So it's kind of like those two theories put together. And something that was important here that was missing in part in the other theories is one that let's see. So that the physiological arousal is the same across emotions. And what differentiates, let's say, fear from anger or sadness from embarrassment is how the individual person interprets or perceives the environment. So in this theory, we have this cognitive appraisal aspect of it. So once these kind of feelings might happen first, the physiological symptoms might happen, and then the cognitive appraisal where you're like, okay, what is it that's leading me to feel or to experience these bodily experiences? And then you kind of get at your subjective feeling. So it's where you're trying to cognitively explain the arousal. Okay. So if you're getting angry, or like you're getting like, I guess hot and bothered is what I have here, is like in a protest. Is that what I have next? Yeah. If it's a protest on campus, you feel the same kinds of physiological reactions. And then you're like, what? Well, why is my body responding this way? Like, oh, I'm angry about this thing that I'm protesting about. So you have this feeling like I'm protesting about something, so I must be feeling anger. If it's a basketball game, that still leads to the same physiological responses as if you were protesting somewhere. But then you think, wait, why am I experiencing these physiological feelings? I'm at a basketball game. So then you reason that this must be about a feeling of excitement. And then the one that we've talked about so far is fear. And you think to yourself, wow, like it just happened that I almost hit a cyclist. And so I know that this is a feeling of fear. And so then you make sense of all of your bodily responses by using a cognitive appraisal technique. Okay. All right. So here are how these two things or how the theories are kind of similar to one another. So physiological arousal is important in leading to your experience of an emotion in the two-factor theory and the James Lange theory. And arousal is the same across emotions. So meaning the physiological arousal is the same across emotions for the two-factor theory and the Cannon-Bard theory. So remember, the problem with the James Lange theory is that multiple emotions can lead to the same physiological responses, and these two theories say, yeah, like, but that's fine. We'll come up with a different way to explain what's happening. So that can get kind of confusing. Okay, so the two-factor theory is also kind of connected. Um, well, here's what we've already showed. The two-factor theory is also kind of connected to what we think about when we think about emotions in this, what is this called? The circumplex model. And the idea is that we can experience a range of emotions that vary on whether they're high or low arousal or somewhere in between, somewhere on that spectrum. And then whether it's more about displeasure or pleasure or somewhere on that spectrum too. And you can kind of put different kinds of emotions anywhere on this spectrum. So like if we're talking about positive emotions that are high arousal, those are like, okay, you're doing a lot, you're excited, that's positive. And then if it's a positive emotion or pleasurable, a low arousal would be something like sleepy or relaxed. Those would be lower. But on the other side, you can have something that's equally as high in arousal, but more about displeasure. So being alarmed or anxious and things like that would be high in arousal. But then low in arousal would be something like, and on the displeasure side would be kind of like the depressed, bored, tired, if these things are kind of on the more negative side. Okay. Why did I put this picture? I think it's just to say there's a valence of emotions that can either be positive or negative. So you can kind of just tell from this picture that this cat is probably feeling positive. And also that there's going to be a range of arousal. So whether they're like, really excited or really calm. And so from this picture, it looks like the cat is probably more on the calm side. Okay. So that would be more like maybe that cat is, so if they're feeling this side but low, probably feeling something like content or calm. Okay. Any questions on the theories of emotions? So they are a little bit tough to remember. And I know that the exams will be open book and open note, but you still really want to get an understanding of what makes these theories different from one another before starting the exam. So you kind of have that like information in mind while you're answering these different questions. Oh, that's a great question. Are there problems for the other three theories? Okay, so yeah, we only really talked about problems with the James Lange theory because I think that was just one of the original theories of emotion. But the James Lange theory was in response to kind of like, oh, emotions don't happen potentially in the way that we think in the common sense way. So I would say the common sense way also has a problem because there is something more to emotions than just you have a feeling and then the physiological response happens. The next two, the Cannon-Bard and the two-factor theory, I think people don't really talk about those as like necessarily having as many problems, although I think people now like thinking about emotions as like the two-factor way, that this makes more sense. So this is even like kind of closer to what the James Lange theory was saying, but there's some cognitive appraisal here. But it's a little confusing because going back, we talked about the physiological arousal. You have a subjective feeling first sometimes. Sometimes it can be faster. But that a lot of emotions, how they happen, especially if they're, they happen all of a sudden. It's not just like I'm starting to walk down this path, this dark path that sometimes you are trying to make sense of this cognitive appraisal and or trying to make sense of the triggering event. So you're using this cognitive appraisal. So you're saying, this is saying like, why is this happening? And leading to this feeling. So yeah, it's just two different ways to think about emotions, and different ideas that researchers have about how it works, but it's hard to tell, like, can you really say that this is the way that it's working versus the two-factor theory? But people seem to like this one, the two-factor theory, because it involves the cognitive appraisal, and it explains why, it better explains why there's similar physiological responses, I'd say, to the triggering event, even though you can do that here as well, because these are separate and independent from each other. But when you add the cognitive appraisal, it does seem to explain where this feeling came from. I know that's not probably the best answer, but I think that's a great question to think about. Okay, what could be the issues with the other theories? Okay. Any other questions about the theories? All right, so just let me know if they come up. So we'll spend not too long talking about these aspects of expressing emotions, but we will for the rest of the class. So expressing emotions is basically how you show others what you're feeling, right? So these facial expressions, your body language, what you say, like things like that, the ways that you can let other people know what you're feeling. And there are differences by culture in what's kind of considered appropriate for what you should be, what's okay to show other people. Okay. So one idea that's pretty popular in talking about emotion expression and what the display rules are. And so what display rules are, it's just like, what's the norm for what kinds of emotions are okay to show to other people and in public, I guess. Okay. Or what, and what's desired, not just okay, but like what's desirable. And display rules can be different by culture. So one study, or one paradigm, there's been multiple studies using this paradigm of the disappointing gift paradigm, looked to see how children react to getting a disappointing gift, and how that changes by age and by culture. So a child gets a gift, and then their responses of like how positive or negative they are measured. And so one paper in particular that looked at these cultural and age differences is this Garrett, Peters, and Fox paper. And they studied 4 to 7-year-olds. And what they found, so let's say, let me give you an example. So if a 4-year-old, is given a toy that they don't like, they're not very good at hiding their emotions. And I'll show that result is there in just a moment. But a 7-year-old might be a bit better. And as you get older, a bit better. So I've seen a video of, a researcher asking like a 10-year-old boy, what would you do? Would you like if your grandma gave you a Barbie for Christmas? And he said, no, I wouldn't like that. I don't like Barbies. And the researcher said, well, what if your grandma thought that was a really good gift for you and she was in the room with you and gave you the Barbie and she was excited to give it to you? What would you do? And he was just like, well, I would say, thank you, Grandma. You shouldn't have, but still act like appreciative and happy because it's like, that's the display rule. You're supposed to show gratitude and not be upset when the person gives you a present, but younger kids are not as good at doing that yet. And I mean, older kids and adults can have some trouble doing this as well, but they're better than younger kids. All right, so in this study, like I said, they were also looking at different cultures. And so this study was looking at Chinese American children and European American children, and was trying to see like how much negative emotion did they show at getting this terrible gift. And the Chinese American children, as a whole, didn't show as much negative emotions, or I mean any emotion, but it's a bad gift. So really, they not showing negative emotions is like, I guess, more mature here than European American children, which tells us that perhaps in Chinese culture, the display rules are going to be different than what it is in like European cultures, where if you don't like something or if you're disappointed with something, you're not really supposed to show it, especially if somebody was trying to give you a present. You should be better at kind of controlling your emotion and kind of saying like, okay, that's fine. Okay. And as I just was talking about before with the example, is that older children were more positive than younger children. So younger children had a harder time, across cultures, pretending like they were okay with the present, that they showed more of these negative facial expressions. Okay. All right, so until age 3, children aren't able to like hide their emotions. So they can't pretend they like something if they didn't. They're going to tell you that they don't like it. So they're not able to engage in these like display rules yet, because they're not old enough for that. They're not able to regulate their emotional expressions. But as they get older, you get better at being able to do that, and show, just not show as negative emotion, and understand that, hey, what I'm feeling inside, other people might not know, and I can hide what I'm feeling inside and act in a different way. And so they're understanding the deceptive part, like, of expressing emotions, that even what you look like on the outside might not be how you're feeling on the inside. I was just going to show this video really quick. This was just Jimmy Kimmel did a thing where they were showing kids opening disappointing presents. So this is kind of the idea that like, how is this kid responding to getting such a negative gift? And if you look at this, you can try to see how kids of different ages are acting, and if it's kind of following along with what I've talked about so far or not. And there's also going to be individual differences here.
Charlie,
I don't like this.
what is it?
An old banana.
An old banana? Isn't that exciting? What are you doing?
Pushing it.
Okay.
A battery and an onion. What's wrong?
I don't want.
Did you smell your onion? Here, smell it.
Open it.
So,
I got a girl activity book with stickers. I'm not a girl. I'm not a toy. I'm not a burrito. The worst present ever.
Marissa, what do you tell me all the time about my cooking?
I love it.
You love my cooking, so I made you something.
Why is it, you know, you should appreciate her getting us a present, but Something like that. Not just a sandwich. Eat all of it.
So you don't want that peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
I'll eat it. I'll eat it.
Okay. So the idea there is kids are going to have trouble showing this like appreciative response, but some kids did a little bit better than other kids. And maybe it could change by the audience, right? So maybe with the parent, they're more comfortable showing, you know, their true emotion. But if it was someone who was outside the family or outside of the immediate family, maybe they'd feel, if they were the older kid, more inclined to be like, oh, thank you, instead of talking about or like acting like they were what they were actually feeling, like actually upset. Okay, so briefly, let's talk about emotion regulation strategies. And so this is basically the idea is like, how do you get yourself to feel better? Okay, and there's not one right answer about like, how do you get yourself to feel better? Actually, and it's even a different question. So one question could be, how do you get yourself to feel better? Another question is, how do you get yourself to stop feeling worse or feeling not feeling as bad? So what might you do to get yourself to feel better if you're thinking about getting surgery tomorrow and you're scared about it or you're nervous about it? What might be a strategy that you'd use to feel better about that? Or what might, not even a strategy, just think about like what you would do to feel better about the fact that you're getting surgery the next day. Eat lots of food. I'm like now imagining a surgery where they're like, you can't eat for 24 hours. Any other ideas? What would you do if you're getting, how do you, like you're getting surgery tomorrow. You're like, oh my gosh, okay, how do I feel better about this? Yeah, research the procedure to feel more comfortable, pray, you know, you're thinking like, all right, let me think of this in a positive way. Look at people who's had a positive outcome from that surgery. Great, you guys are very proactive. Journal, I think that's great too. Like, you're like, all right, I'm just gonna reflect on this. Distraction, watch something that's funny. Like, don't think about it anymore. Talk to family members, so don't bottle up your emotions. Sleep, those are all like could be something that's good ideas. Meditate, talk to friends. Right. Okay, so I mean, I think for surgery, you know, if it's happening the next day and there's nothing that you could really do about it, let's say you've already done your research, you've looked at positive outcomes. Maybe at this point you're like, I'm just going to distract myself. Like, I'm not going to think about it. It's already happening tomorrow. Or talk to friends about it. That could be great too. But like, would that distraction technique work for taking an exam? You're like, I have an exam tomorrow. I'm stressed about it. I'm anxious. I'm going to distract myself. Okay, I don't even think I need an answer for that because I think you guys realize like that wouldn't work as well. So also pray. Yeah, so like hopefully the exam goes okay. So what are some ways to feel better about knowing that you like about taking an exam tomorrow? Maybe you don't feel the best about it and it's going to happen tomorrow. Cry, panic. There might be a little bit more, some more productive ways to help you feel better, right? Yeah, watch graduation video, motivate success, be confident in your prior studying, good sleep. Yeah, you're like, all right, I'll get good sleep. Reassuring yourself, eat. I feel that was common with getting surgery too. Don't overthink it. Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting that some of your techniques for taking an exam are kind of similar. You're like, all right, even being confident, like, all right, the surgery is going to go well, feeling confident about the exam is going to go well, confidence, those things could work. The exam's still the next day. You could make yourself feel better by studying a little bit more too. You know, obviously you don't want to cram, but ignoring it completely might not be your best bet if you feel like you don't know the material as much. But if you've done some prior studying and you feel pretty confident in it, maybe just a little bit of review and you're like, oh, like reviewing this actually makes me feel better. Like I'm actually do feel like I understand this. I am confident in what I know. Okay. Okay, so this shouldn't be that surprising that emotion regulation is important. So being able to regulate your emotions is better. So let's say knowing when, like if you're feeling really, really upset and sad, but it maybe you kind of like tell yourself like, okay, how can I like reframe the situation? If you're better at doing those kinds of things, usually social competence is also increased. So, you know, better friendships and better able to make new friends and things like that. But also the other way too, like if you're feeling like really proud and happy about something and it's not maybe, there's display rules that say, you know, like in some cultures, like in Eastern cultures, displaying individual pride is not something that is seen as positive. So knowing when to like regulate those positive emotions down so you can kind of harmonize with the group a little bit better. So that kind of regulation is important. And then also for cognitive functioning, because it's emotion regulation takes effort a lot of the time. So usually when you're better able to do that, then it's also going to be related to better cognitive functioning and general aspects as well. Okay, so we can talk about emotion regulation as like, all right, how much can we control the emotion that we're feeling? And so a lot of times some unsuccessful strategies, and it goes into it a little bit more in your book, I believe, as well, are suppression and rumination. And so I kind of got the sense that some people in the chat thought suppression would be unsuccessful as well. So like, even though distraction is, you could be like, I don't want to think about it. Maybe you're suppressing your emotions a little bit there. But if you're like, I'm just not going to feel this at all, and I'm just going to put it away and suppress it completely, that usually doesn't help you feel completely better. But the complete opposite, which is rumination and just thinking about it over and over and over and over again, also isn't really helpful, because you're not really changing the meaning of what's happening, which is something that's been shown to be more of a successful strategy. So one, I'll just go to the second one right here. So if you change the meaning, that's reappraisal. So reappraisal would mean I'm thinking of something negative, like getting surgery tomorrow, and you're feeling anxious about that. So, right, you might be focusing on what if it goes poorly? What if this is painful? That kind of thing. But if you start thinking about it in a different way, about how the surgery is going to help me, the pain is only temporary, it's going to help more in the long run, you're reappraising the situation and making it more meaningful in a positive way. Another successful strategy, if it's something that's causing you to feel a certain emotion that you have control over whether you're exposed to it or not, then you can just change the location, change the situation. If there's a movie that's scaring you and you're like, I don't want to feel scared anymore, then the easiest thing would be just to stop watching the movie and walk away from it. If there's a group of friends that are making you feel a certain way, then instead of changing the meaning, you could just also move away from it if you can. So if you can change the situation, then that could be successful. But if you can't, a lot of times changing the meaning is going to be something that's going to be the successful strategy. Okay. So why, just in the last couple of minutes, why do we have emotions? One idea is thinking about emotions all serve a purpose. They all have a function. This would be considered the functional approach, that emotions are central to everything about humans and adaptive. So the adaptive, that's in blue because that's the part that's saying they serve a function. They're adaptive in some reason, in some way. So for example, fear would be avoiding danger. Happiness, like the reason why we might show happiness or feel happiness is to help us bond with other people. Something like disgust, it could be, again, to like avoid danger or avoid sickness. Sadness could even have a function to help us like also bonding with others, just through something, but that's not happiness, okay? And this is just saying, so the require cognition and affect cognition, shaped by interactions. All this is really saying is that emotions are going to connect to thoughts. So your thoughts can, your emotions can lead to changes in thoughts, but your thoughts also lead to changes in emotions, and your social interactions or your behaviors are also going to be shaped or affected by emotions as well. Okay, very quickly, this is just about basic emotions. So basic emotions are emotions that are experienced by people worldwide. So they're universal. Across cultures, people experience a lot of the same emotions and can recognize emotions. So what this tells us is that there's a really strong innate component to certain emotional experiences. And what that innate means is that it's something kind of like we're born with, it's part of our biology. If people in like tribes that have never been exposed to the Western world recognize pictures of people, recognize emotions and pictures of people that they've never seen, it probably tells us something like, oh, well, I guess in all cultures, when somebody's happy, they smile. There's no culture that you're like, oh no, our sign for happiness is frowning. Okay, so it doesn't really work that way. And this comes from cross-cultural studying and looking at like what actual muscles are moving in facial expressions. So this is just to show, if you think about it, just like it should be pretty easy for you once you look at an emotion. So with one, just think about what emotion that is. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are all pretty easily recognizable faces. Even if you didn't get all of them, that's okay. But the idea is that people will recognize these at a greater than chance level, even without knowing who these people are and in different cultures and things like that. Okay, so we've reached our time. So let's be done with lecture for today, and then let me know if you have any questions. I'll be posting this, or at least the audio file, for people who are not here. And please be on the lookout for the Canvas assignment that'll be due before the exam, and it'll just be whatever your answer was, that 1 through 5, you just will tell me what group you were in, and then your number, and then that's it. And or I'll let you know if there's like another sentence to add or anything like that. All right, well, thank you. Hopefully that went pretty smoothly, and I will see some of you on Thursday. All right, let's end. How do I get into this? Now I don't know where my Zoom is. Stop share. Look at that. Okay, now I can end the meeting. Bye.